driven through the fear. And one of the things that I got out of racing was the understanding that there isn't much in life that you ever grow personally with unless it causes pain or fear or something that you have to overcome. My name's David Deacon. I'm an artist, a singer, a songwriter, businessman, and I used to be a race car driver. I was in university, I did a couple of years, and I came to the conclusion that I was more driven by my art at the time than by university living. So I dropped out of university, went to Paris, studied art, and I'd had a nice exhibition the university had put on before I left. I sold everything out, and I got enough money from that and selling my motorcycle to be able to pay for a year in Paris. I came back and I was having a hard time making a living as an artist. I'd say I almost made a living. And so one of the things I was doing at the time was starting to do some dirt track motorcycle racing. And practicing one day, I had a huge crash. I ended up practically dead on arrival at the hospital. I had 11 hours of neurosurgery. I had a pin through one leg, 5 breaks there. The other one had a compound fracture. I have a plate in my head. So it was serious. I spent basically 9 months in the recovering process. But you know, what happened then, when I had a chance to think about it, I thought, if I died at that moment, I wouldn't have regretted anything in my life. There wasn't anything that I looked at and I said, gee, I wish I hadn't done that, or I wish I'd done that. It was really one of those things where I was quite happy that I was engaged in the things I was. So to me, that just made a commitment to always trying to live my life, the most important thing after that. And I still wanted to go fast, so I then started racing cars. In talking about racing, I guess there are a couple of things. What is it about racing that captured me? And in a way, I guess the most important part is, to me, racing forces you to get right in the exact center of the second. You can't live outside of it. It's sort of like transcendental meditation at speed. Everything can be so disastrous in terms of consequences if you make a mistake. So you have to be totally focused. And in those days, deaths were more frequent. Like prior to 1990, 20 people were killed at Le Mans. Prior to 1990, of the 50 Formula One drivers ever killed, 47 of them were prior to 1990. So in those days, every year, death was a part of the process. So focus was a really big part. And what I found is, it was the thing for me that got me the most away from the world and the most into the moment. And it was addictive in that sense. But there are things you go through in the process. So for example, the first time at Le Mans, I'm going down the Mulsanne Straight, going flat out, but you come to a little part, it's called the kink. And in that car, it sort of, you know, is a little skittery at that point, and you're doing 220 miles an hour. So my foot came off the throttle. It slows you down. It's a 28 turn course, 15 kilometers long, and my lap time was about 10 seconds slower than my teammates. And I was going, I know what's going wrong here. I got to go flat out through the kink. But it was hard. It was strictly an intellectual decision. And after a few laps, I just used every muscle in my right leg to keep the throttle down, go through flat out. The car skittered a bit, caught just before the guardrail. You go through. I come around the pits, I see my lap time, and I've dropped 7 seconds. So I know that's the answer. And I do that for about 4 laps, and then they call me in, and Hans Stuck, who is in the sister car, sees me sitting on some tires in the back of the pits, and he says, "What's the matter, David?" And I said, "Hans, do you find the car a little skittery in the kink?" And he said, "Yeah." And I said, "Couldn't we crank a little more wing into it and stabilize it?" And he says, "Oh, it'd slow us down too much on the straightaway." And he says, "Don't worry, David. After a couple of hours, you'll be used to it." Well, at 2 o'clock in the morning in the middle of the race, driving flat out with my lights only lighting up the apex of the turn after I've started turning in for it at the kink, and I realized I was used to it. I'd driven through the fear. And one of the things that I got out of racing was the understanding that there isn't much in life that you ever grow personally with unless it causes pain or fear or something that you have to overcome. In a way, I can hardly believe I got the job, president of Porsche Canada, and you say, I had no experience in the car business, and how did I do it? I wrote down all the things, I thought about it. What do I know about the business? What do I think I know about the business? And what do I really not know anything about? So I went in for my interviews, and I told them the things that I thought I knew and managed the conversation that way. Then, would have more of a back and forth about things that I felt comfortable about. And then anything where there was an opportunity, where I saw an opportunity to talk to them about what I didn't know, I'd ask them, so how do you deal with this? Or what do you think about this? And it really ended up, they engaged with me, and I think thought I was a lot smarter than I was because of the way I managed the conversations. And I think that, that also is part of what we do. I feel like luck has a fair amount to do, just we happen to be in the right place at the right time, or we happen not to be in the right place at the right time. In that instance, they were looking for that person, and I got to do a number of years running Porsche Canada that were just fabulously interesting business years for me. Okay, so I was a race car driver, and I looked at it and I said, what Porsches stand for is the racing heritage. And everybody who buys a Porsche is sort of buying a piece of that racing heritage. And the 944 was the least expensive car in the Porsche lineup at that time. And it was kind of looked down at by the 911 owners, et cetera. It wasn't a true Porsche. So I thought, I'm going to create a racing series for just that car, so people can see what a brilliant car it is. And as it turned out, it was the first single mark Porsche racing series in the world. And now, it's funny, 35 years later, people are celebrating that. And I got a nice article written about me a little while ago, 35 years later, saying, hey, this guy did the first series and he did it in Canada. And it ended up being copied in other countries. But what it did for me in a business sense was it really launched the 944. And it helped me to take the Canadian market from the 13th largest in the world to the 6th largest in the world in a 4-year period. When you provide leadership that has ethical and moral values, the organization feels that. And they start to work like that themselves, and they value that themselves. And so you can build, even if it's a small business, you can build a brand that people believe in and are confident in and will trust. How I got into music is kind of strange. Since I was in high school, I used to write poetry. I was in 1993 walking up the Upper East Side in New York City, and there was a sign outside a bar, and it said, poetry reading tonight, George Plimpton. And I thought, I think I write as good poetry as George Plimpton could. So I went in and I ordered a large scotch, and I asked to talk to the manager, and this woman came over and she said yes. And I said, I'd like to open for George Plimpton tonight. I'd like to do a couple of poems. And she says, that's pretty strange. Give me a poem. And I gave her a couple of poems, and she said, oh, okay, you can open for George. So I did. They invited me back about a month and a half later to be their Valentine's Day poet. And they had an opening act for me, and it was a woman folk singer, and she did lovely stuff. And I thought, man, I'm going to be so dull now just reciting poetry, given this, we've had this musical entertainment. So I thought I should put together a musical background. I got back to Toronto, and over the next couple of months put together a band slowly as a backdrop to my spoken word, which 9 months later turned into my first CD. And strangely, at the time, there was one song Hole in Heaven, it was called, that was really liked by both Chum FM and 99.9 The Mix at the time. Those were the two big stations at the time. So they gave it not a lot of play, but light play. And that helped me to do, over the next few years, almost 10,000 sales of CDs on a private basis. And yeah, so that's how I got into music and what I did. Now, 20 years after that, I decided to do it again because I wanted to do it differently. I wanted to do it more lyrical. I wanted to write music more into the whole piece and make it a more integrated part. And I wanted to control the mix and the sounds because I felt that with my, really, as my youngest daughter says, Dad, wouldn't it be amazing if you did well in music, given your voice? You know, and it's right. It's like, how do you get my voice across in a way that people go, oh, I like that, you know. She rationalized her heart. So, you know, I write my music for my kind of sound and then put it into a package that I think makes the writing accessible. And as you may notice in it, lyrics are obviously very important to me. And so a big focus on that is sort of the poetry of the music. So Lullaby for Cecilia, I wrote, I was on a plane flying out of Rome and heading to the Alps, and there was some big bumps, and then all of a sudden the oxygen mask dropped down and the pilot came down lower and he says, we've lost cabin pressure, we have to go back. Blah, blah. I was sitting there thinking, wow, this, you know, this may not be a good thing. And I thought, is there anything left undone in my head or heart? And the only thing I could think of is I thought, I wonder if my daughter will know how much I love her. So I started writing it and I finished it over the next 2 days. So yeah, it definitely captured, you know, a nice emotion. And really, most of it is just a little bit of an ode to her beauty. But the one bit in the bridge where it says, you'll rarely see yourself collecting all of life's little hopes where they lie. But suddenly, you'll be caught unsuspecting, a young woman in the midst of a sigh. And in that silent frame, each night remember, love is not always the same. Each night remember. So from the distance of the magician's magic into each passing day, you should keep some carnival laughter to dispel the tragic, not far from the cradle where you always sleep. And when you fall asleep, the angels whisper, your nights and days to keep. The angels whisper, Cecilia, Cecilia, my girl. First of all, I guess I kind of think that you never really need to tell your daughter she's physically beautiful. Maybe you do once in a while, but it's not anything that to me it matters a lot. What does matter is talking about things that you think matter in the world and values and things like that. And so it's interesting to me because we do have those conversations because we chat a lot. We have a pattern where every night before she goes to sleep, I lie in her bed with her and we talk for 10 or 15 or 20 minutes about ideas. Anything she wants, or we tell jokes, or we sing a song together, or whatever it happens to be. So she was telling me a little while ago that, you know, there was a girl who was kind of bullying her and was trying to get her other girlfriends not to like her and everything else. And it was getting tough. And so 2 weeks ago, she says, you know, I got an idea. And she said, I think what I want to do is get all 6 of these girls, including the one who was not being nice at all, a little Christmas present and write them a card and tell them why I got them this particular present and what it is and whatever else. And I said, and you're going to get this girl one too? And she says, yeah. She said, you know what, Dad? It's going to be hard, really harder for her not to be nice to me if I'm nice to her, isn't it? And so that tells me that her beauty is growing inside very well.